In this section, we're going to talk a bit about conflicts of interest and our relationships with our referral sources. The first thing we'll talk about are conflicts of interest. Our business decisions here at GoHealth should be based on ethical principles, objective business criteria, and what's best for our patients, our organizations, and even what's best for the communities that we serve. So what's a conflict of interest? A conflict is anything personal, financial, or otherwise that could directly and significantly affect an employee's decision-making ability. Conflicts of interest can also be actual or perceived. Just because you personally don't think a conflict would affect your decision-making ability or bias your judgment doesn't mean that others wouldn't feel the same. We have some policies around our industry and vendor relationships. Essentially, what these policies say is that we should always ensure that our vendor and business relationships do not cloud our ethical judgment. So again, any relationship we have with a vendor or industry in general should never cloud our decision-making ability for doing what's right for our patients, what's right for our organizations, what's right for our JV partners, what's right for the communities we serve. We always want to keep that front in mind. And so this relationship with vendors and industry policy really sets parameters around what the ethical limitations to those relationships are. Discussed in the policy is education and conference attendance, speaking and consultation engagement, receiving gratitudes from patients, business courtesies, and more. So please review this information and review this policy and understand it. It's important to understand the policies around conflicts of interest and our relationships with vendors and industry, because there are various federal and state laws that apply to how we can conduct business with third parties outside of GoHealth. Two of the main laws that apply here are the anti-kickback statute and the civil monetary penalties law. The anti-kickback statute prohibits paying others for patients' referrals, receiving payment for referring patients to other entities, or even asking for something like that. So if I just came to you and said, hey, for every patient you refer to me, I'm going to send you $20. Does that sound good? And we agree on that, that's a violation of the anti-kickback statute. But even me coming to you and asking, even if you say, no, I don't want any part of that, that's problematic. The simple fact that I asked you for something like that could violate the anti-kickback statute for me. So we need to stay away from any type of situation where patient referrals are being induced. The civil monetary penalties law prohibits beneficiary inducement. So this isn't really as much around vendors and third parties as it is around patients. And what the civil monetary penalties law prohibits is any kind of inducement to a patient to select our services. So we can't give patients gift cards, we can't give them anything really of value to get them to select our services. They need to come to us because they think we're the best quality and best care that they can get. We're not going to induce patients to come to us by giving them gifts or anything else. The Stark Law is similar to the anti-kickback statute, but the scope is a bit different. The Stark Law applies only to physicians. So it doesn't apply to nurse practitioners, physician assistants, or anybody else. It applies only to physicians or their immediate family members. What the Stark Law does is it essentially prohibits patient referrals by the physician to an entity that she or he has a financial relationship with. So an example of this is you have a community physician and maybe they're a cardiologist and they frequently send patients to a local community hospital for heart surgery. Maybe the hospital approaches the physician and says, hey, we want to make you the medical director of our cardiac program. That's all well and good, but that implicates Stark Law. Essentially what that means is that now that the physician is the medical director for the cardiac program at the hospital, they have a financial relationship and they can't refer any services to the hospital, so they basically couldn't perform surgery there unless there's an exception that applies under Stark. And those exceptions can get very complex very quickly. There are legal ways to accomplish that. The key thing to know though is that if you feel like there's a physician who has an inappropriate relationship or financial arrangement with an entity, please let somebody know so that we can look into this more. So some examples of conflicts of interest and vendor relationship concerns: referring patients in exchange for something of value. Again, this is a kickback issue. this is pretty straightforward, but this is a situation where we have a vendor that approaches us. Maybe they're a home health vendor, and they say, hey, for every patient that you discharge from your center and you recommend our home health services, we'll send you $20. That's problematic. Accepting non-reciprocal gifts or items intended to influence vendors. So again, our vendor relationships should be reciprocal in nature. There's nothing in our policies that says that you can't have dinner with a vendor or anything like that. However, everything that we do should be reciprocal. And what I mean by that is that the vendor shouldn't be bringing in steak and lobster for a lunch and learn, because there's really no reciprocal nature there. But as a different example, if the vendor comes in and maybe we're having protracted contract negotiations, and those contract negotiations go over lunch every single day for a week, and one day the vendor provides lunch, one day we provide lunch, the next day the vendor provides lunch, the next day we provide lunch. That's reciprocal, and that's okay. But it's really creating an atmosphere where neither side feels obligated or indebted to the other. It needs to be reciprocal in nature and in value. Physicians making referrals to entities with which they have a financial relationship. Again, this is an implication of the Stark Law. That type of referral, if they have a financial relationship with the referral entity, would be a violation of Stark Law unless there's some kind of exception that applies. And again, there are typically and usually exceptions that do apply, but they get very nuanced and very complex very quickly. So again, if you ever feel like there's an inappropriate relationship between a physician and a third party, it's important to let compliance know so that we can look into that. Giving gifts to patients to induce them to use our services. We've talked about this. We wouldn't give gift cards, anything of value to a patient to get them to use our services. We really want to compete on the quality of the services that we provide. And lastly, providing excessive discounts on services or items without a valid business reason. So in this, an example is maybe a vendor comes to us and says, hey, if you use our product, we'll give you computers for free, or we'll give you this type of service for 95% discount, something like that. Again, that's a value, and that can be considered a payment under the anti-kickback statute or under Stark, and so we need to be very careful of that. If there's no valid business reason, then there must be some other reason that they're doing that, and if that reason relates to generating patients' referrals, that's problematic.